Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'm going to chant for a little while, and then I think I want to read out of Krishna book. So, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I wonder what effect chanting the mantra has on your heartbeat. Does it synchronize your heartbeat? Or what about your brain activity? Does it synchronize? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. I mean, they do these studies on what sound does to matter. Like, there's a bunch of YouTube ones out there. Different kinds of sound vibrations. And then the patterns that develop. They use sand. Sometimes they use sand. Hare Krishna, see, develop different patterns. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. A friend introduced me to these electrical treatments. I was curious, I went, and there's a vibrational pulse that is supposed to help rejuvenate muscles, like especially people with problems in the back. They've had back injuries and the muscles are damaged, or it's supposed to help rejuvenate with these vibrational impulses. That's just on the material thing. What about the transcendental sound? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Just like preparing food and offering to Krishna. You don't offer directly, we offer through our spiritual master. And Krishna accepts the offering. And then when the food is distributed and the devotees and people eat it, it's transformational. Now they know that every cell in the body is completely different. Different elements in there every 7 years. They have that rejuvenation. They rejuvenate every 7 years. But it just in the natural course of walking around in a body, the cells all rejuvenate every 7 years. So if someone is offering the food to Krishna and eating the remnants for 7 years, if it's transformational. That means their body has become prasadamized. That's food that's offered to Krishna, the remnants is called prasadam, mercy of the Lord. So they eat that for 7 years, then they get a prasadam body. So what to speak of chanting the vibration, the mantra? You get a Krishna body, a body suitable for pleasing Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, on the same vibrational platform. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. That's why they say don't try to jump over. Don't try to take a shortcut. Because it's a process for transformation. It's a science. Don't try to jump over. Surrender. 16 rounds. 4 regulative principles. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. There's a devotee here that told me at his initiation, when Prabhupada handed him his initiation beads and asked him, to chant 16 rounds and then what are the 4 regulative principles? And the devotee told him, no meat, fish, or eggs, no intoxication, no gambling, no illicit sex. Prabhupada gave him his beads. Your name is... And if you do this, 16 rounds and 4 regular principles, you'll go back to Godhead. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. I believe that. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. don't try to jump over. Hare Krishna, Hare, don't concoct. Don't come up with a better way. Just surrender. Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I find myself remembering something about Gorkashore Das Babaji, who was in line of succession. He only had one disciple. His disciple was Bhakti Siddhanta. He just had one initiated disciple, Bhakti Siddhanta. And from that, Hare Krishna. So Gorkashore Das Babaji he's an acharya, he's a pure devotee. But he didn't actively preach. He preferred to do solitary bhajan. And he avoided people, really. People would come to him, but they had all kinds of other desires, and he was fixed in his bhajan. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He only initiated Bhakti Siddhanta because Bhakti Siddhanta threatened that to kill himself if he didn't accept him. And Gorkashore saw that he was serious and he would do it. Because one day Gorkashore was walking along, I think, a bridge. I don't know, do they have bridges? Anyway, and Bhakti Siddhanta positioned himself in such a way that as Gorkashore walked by, if Gorkashore didn't agree to take him as a disciple, he was going to jump to his death. Which is alright. Right, come on. It's coming. His only disciple, Bhakti Siddhanta. And Gorkashore was illiterate. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. So he really stands out in this line of succession because everybody else is very active, in active preaching, going out. They're all educated, very educated people. And there's Gorkashore, the spiritual master of one of the most intelligent and intellectual Vaishnavacharyas ever, Bhakti Siddhanta, and that's his spiritual master. Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. So I was thinking about Gorkashore. I think about him a lot, and there's another account of as his time for leaving the body was approaching, and it would be very soon when he left. So he gave instruction, because I believe it was in Navadvip. It's probably Mayapur, Navadvip area. I don't think it's not Vrindavan. It must have been Navadvip, Mayapur, I think. Yeah. Anyway, the other sadhus in the area, they recognized Gorkashore as a great Babaji, and they wanted to get some of his glory, because he was glorious. They wanted to get some of his glory for themselves. So Gorkashore, he gave the instruction that when I leave, drag this body through the street. this useless body, drag it through the street. So there were several of them, these Babajis and Babus, gurus, of different caliber, aesthetics, yogis. So they wanted to get some mercy from this great Acharya. So they were fighting who was going to do that. Because whoever could do that, they would get some of his mercy. Now Bhaktisiddhanta was the only disciple, and he wasn't going to stand for that. No one's dragging my spiritual master's body through the street. We're doing a samadhi. But they were arguing not only which one would get to do it, but arguing with the disciple that this is his instruction. He said, you have to follow his instruction. So Bhaktisiddhanta, he said, okay, here's how we'll decide. Who amongst us has not engaged in illicit sexual activity in the last year? And no one could say. They all. He said, all right, who has not engaged in illicit sexual activity in the last month? No one could step forward. See, whoever could answer that, they could do it. But no one could answer. So then he said, all right, who has not engaged in illicit sexual activity within the last week? Still there was silence. Then he said, within the last day? No one could speak up. So Bhaktisiddhanta was able to take the body of his spiritual master and appropriately put in a samadhi. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It can get confusing because, like a friend of mine said a while ago, the holy name's been let loose on the planet. And people are taking it up. Krishna, Krishna. Musicians, philosophers, entertainers, politicians, they're taking this up. They're accepting, okay, Krishna. So it can get confusing because it's like Krishna everywhere. So to remain resolute on the path, fixed, need a spiritual master. Need a spiritual master, a guide, a mentor, a personal connection. We need that. Otherwise, it's like Krishna's coming. This one's got Krishna, that one's got, everybody's got Krishna, and it's like. So for me, this is the lifeline to Prabhupada. And I understand anyone can take shelter like that because it's the standard for the institution that he established for Krishna consciousness. It's the standard, regardless of who someone might accept an initiation from within the institution. The standard is there because Prabhupada's the founder of Charya. And the standard is 16 rounds minimum and 4 regulative principles. And that keeps us resolute. We're protected from all the, not only all the material stuff pulling on your senses, but also now hearing Krishna coming from here and Krishna coming from there, and it's like being in an echo chamber. 16 rounds, 4 regulative principles. Be protected. At least that's my experience. So I'm going to read Krishna book here. It's not easy. If you're living in the world and you've got, to take care of yourself, with rent or mortgage or maintain a house or a family, you have to work, you have to do something. It's not easy. 16 rounds. Good rounds. Every day. It's a sacrifice for the age. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It makes Prabhupada very happy. It's the only thing he ever asked all of his disciples, indiscriminately. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is a summary study of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And this is chapter 86. Prayers by the Personified Vedas. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. King Parikshit inquired from Sukadeva Goswami about a very important topic in understanding transcendental subject matter. So Maharaj Parikshit is preparing to leave his body. He has 7 days to prepare. And he's hearing from Sukadeva Goswami, who is the son of Srila Vyasadeva. And they're gathered at the banks of the Ganges, and there are other saints and sages there also. And they're all hearing this Krishna Katha, this Bhagavatam, from Sukadeva Goswami as he heard it from his father, Vyasadeva. So he inquired from Sukadeva Goswami about a very important topic in understanding transcendental subject matter. His question was, since Vedic knowledge generally deals with the subject matter of the 3 qualities of the material world, how can it approach the subject matter of transcendence, which is beyond the approach of the 3 material modes? Since the mind is material, and the vibration of words is a material sound, how can the Vedic knowledge, expressing by material sound the thoughts of the mind, approach transcendence? Description of a subject matter necessitates describing its source of emanation, its qualities, and its activities. Such description can be possible only by thinking with the material mind and vibrating material words. Although Brahman, or the Absolute Truth, has no material qualities, our power of speaking does not go beyond the material qualities. How then can Brahman, the Absolute Truth, be described? By your words. I do not see how it is possible to understand transcendence from an expression of material sound. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. That's, to say the least, a very good question. And this is one of the longest chapters ever. In the actual 10th canto, it's not very long. It's a question and then there's an answer. There's a little bit of discussion and then there's an answer. But Srila Prabhupada took the opportunity to do almost 70 pages on this topic. How can material words approach transcendental reality? Material words coming from a material mind, how can they? Okay, the purpose of King Parikshit's inquiry was to ascertain from Sukadeva Goswami whether the Vedas ultimately describe the absolute truth as impersonal or as personal. Understanding the absolute truth progresses in three features: impersonal Brahman, Paramatma, localized in everyone's heart, and at last, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. The Vedas deal with three departments of activities. One is called Karmakanda, or activities under Vedic conjunction, which gradually purify one to understand his real position. The next is Jnanakanda, the process of understanding the absolute truth by speculative methods. And the third is Upasanakanda, or worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and sometimes of the demigods also. The worship of the demigods recommended in the Vedas is ordered with the understanding of the demigod's relationship to the Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has many parts and parcels. Some are called svamsas, or his personal expansions, and some are called vibhanamsas, the living entities. So this chapter is very detailed. It's very, very detailed. And I was thinking how there's different ways that we get Prabhupada's, connect with Prabhupada. One is by hearing from Prabhupada. Like this is hearing from Prabhupada. We can see he's very learned and he's very Krishna conscious and he's explaining how everything works. Full knowledge, transcendental knowledge, in the spirit of devotion. And then another way that we get Prabhupada's mercy is by hearing about Prabhupada. So we hear from Prabhupada, and we also get to hear about Prabhupada. And that's what we've been reading the last few days, is Prabhupada's activities and his struggles in Krishna consciousness. His personal devotional path. So we hear about Prabhupada and we hear from Prabhupada. That's like Krishna. The Bhagavad Gita is we hear from Krishna. The Srimad Bhagavatam is we hear about Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So we're hearing from Prabhupada some really detailed stuff. And it's not necessary to memorize all of this, but to be familiar a little bit with it. And then from time to time come back to it, and then eventually you've got it. You know, it's not. Just familiarize and also know where these things are discussed. So all such expansions. Okay, so the Supreme Personality of Godhead has many parts and parcels. Some are svamsas, his personal expansions, his Vishnu expansions. And some are vibhanamsas, the living entities. All such expansions, both svamsas and vibhanamsas, are emanations from the original Personality of Godhead. Svamsa expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, like Nishingadev, Matsya, Kurma, Balaram. Whereas the Vibhanamsa expansions are called Jiva Tattva. Now Radharani's not an expansion, she's an energy, Shakti Tattva. He's talking here about expansions. So we're an expansion of Krishna. But we're not the same as the Vishnu expansions. We're Jiva Tattva expansions. So we're just like Krishna, but the Vishnu Tattvas, they're just like Krishna. But the Jiva Tattva expansions are just like Krishna, but the different demigods are Jiva Tattva. They're Vibhanamsa. The conditioned souls are generally put into the activities of the material world for sense gratification. Therefore, as stated in Bhagavad Gita, to regulate those who are very much addicted to different kinds of sense gratification, the worship of the demigods is sometimes recommended. But not the demigod without understanding the demigod's connection to Krishna. For example, for persons who are very much addicted to meat eating, the Vedic injunction recommends that after worshipping the form of the goddess Kali and sacrificing a goat, not any other animal, under Karmakanda regulation, the worshippers may be allowed to eat meat. It's interesting about that because there's a mantra that's recited into the goat's ear at the time of the sacrifice, and it roughly translates as, I'm taking your life now, and in a future birth you'll be able to take my life. Kind of spoils your appetite, doesn't it? The idea is not to encourage one to eat meat, but to allow one who is persistent to eat meat under certain restricted conditions. Therefore, worship of the demigods is not worship of the absolute truth, but by worshiping the demigods, one gradually comes to accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead in an indirect way. This indirect acceptance is described in the Bhagavad Gita as avidhi. Indirect acceptance. Okay. Avidhi means not bona fide. Avidhi. When there's an A before a word, a lot of times grammatically in Sanskrit it means not. So Sura is demigod, Asura is demon. Vaishnav, devotee of the Lord, a Vaishnav, devotee of the Lord, not a devotee of the Lord. So avidhi means not bona fide. Vidhi means bona fide, and avidhi means not bona fide. Since demigod worship is not bona fide, the impersonalists stress concentration on the impersonal feature of the absolute truth. Okay, so the impersonalists, they understand the problem with the demigod worship, and so they turn to something that they consider higher, which is higher, the impersonal feature of the absolute. King Parikshit's question was, which is the ultimate target of Vedic knowledge? Concentration on the impersonal feature of the absolute truth, or concentration on the personal feature? After all, both the impersonal and personal features of the Supreme Lord are beyond our material conception. Yeah, because his question was, how can words coming and thoughts coming from material mind and material words, how can they approach the transcendence? So, to take that a step further, he's asking the question, well, which is it? Is it the impersonal transcendence or the personal? Arjuna asked the same question. In the Gita, he asked the same question. Which is better? The impersonal feature of the Absolute, the Brahman effulgence, is but the rays of the personal body of Krishna. These rays of the personal body of Krishna are cast all over the creation of the Lord, and the portion of effulgence which is covered by the material cloud is called the created cosmos of the three material qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Okay. So, all over the manifestation, when you say creation, a lot of times people think, oh, it has a beginning. But this kind of creation doesn't have a beginning. It's more like a manifestation. It's not like a creation. But sometimes the word creation would describe it anyway, because it is a creation. It's just that it doesn't have a beginning. So there you go. And no end. So the rays of the personal body of Krishna are cast all over the manifestation of the Lord, the creation of the Lord. And the portion of the effulgence, it's a small portion, covered by a material cloud, is the created cosmos of the three material qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, goodness, passion, and ignorance. How can persons who are within this clouded portion called the material world conceive of the absolute truth? By the speculative method. In answering King Parikshit's question, Sukadeva Goswami replied that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has created the mind, senses, and living force for the purpose of sense gratification in transmigration from one kind of body to another, as well as for the purpose of allowing liberation from the material conditions. In other words, the senses, mind, and living force can be utilized for sense gratification and transmigration from one body to another, or for the matter of liberation. Yo, Krishna, Hare Krishna. The Vedic injunctions are there to give the conditioned souls the chance for sense gratification under regulative principles, and thereby also give them the chance for promotion to a higher condition of life. Ultimately, if the consciousness is purified, one comes to his original position and goes back home, back to Godhead. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. This is a very long chapter. In the summary study, Prabhupada takes almost 70 pages. In the actual Bhagavatam, it's just, a few verses. It's a verse, a little bit of discussion, and away you go. But in the Krishna book, Prabhupada took the opportunity to do 70 pages. Parikshit Maharaj is asked the question, how can a material mind, and using material words and material thoughts, approach the transcendence? He's asked that question. And it brings into play that to the Vedas, these Vedic scriptures, do they ultimately describe the impersonal feature of the Lord or the personal feature? So that's being discussed here. It's very detailed. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It's not good to jump over, to try to jump over to, because it's a matter of purification. So chanting, offering food to Krishna, getting purified, more and more purified, more and more purified. But to jump over, it's not a good idea. Usually doesn't have a good end. It doesn't end well, usually. Of course, whatever anyone does in Krishna consciousness is never lost, and you pick up where you left off. But it can be a big detour for quite a while from the actual path. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Just keep chanting Hare Krishna. The vibration is purifying. It get more and more purified the more you chant Hare Krishna. All right, it's pretty detailed stuff. I'll try one more paragraph. The living force is intelligent. Therefore, has to utilize its intelligence over the mind and the senses. When the mind and senses are purified by the proper use of intelligence, then the conditioned soul is liberated. Otherwise, if the intelligence is not properly utilized in controlling senses and mind, the conditioned soul continues to transmigrate from one kind of body to another simply for sense gratification. Another point clearly stated in the answer of Sukadeva Goswami is that the Lord created the mind, senses, and intelligence of the living force, individual living force. It is not stated that the living entities themselves were ever created. Just as the shining particle of the sun's rays are always existing along with the sun, the living entities exist eternally as parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The conditioned souls, although eternally existing as part of the Supreme Lord, are sometimes put within the cloud of the material concept of life, in the darkness of ignorance. The whole Vedic process is to alleviate that darkened condition. Ultimately, when the senses and mind of the conditioned being become fully purified, he then comes to the original position called Krishna consciousness, and that is liberation. In the Vedanta Sutra, the first sutra, or code, questions about the absolute truth. So this is the first verse in the Vedanta Sutra. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Roughly translated, what is the nature of the absolute truth? The next sutra answers that the nature of the absolute truth is, he's the origin of everything. Whatever we experience, even in this material condition of life, is but an emanation from him. The absolute truth created the mind and senses and intelligence. He didn't create the living entity per se. We're eternally parts and parcels of him, or a manifestation of him, Jiva Tattva. So we don't have a beginning or an end, but we can find ourselves in some unusual situations, that's for sure. The absolute truth did create the mind, senses, and intelligence. This means that the absolute truth is not without mind, intelligence, and senses. In other words, he's not impersonal. You can't give something you don't have. You don't have it, how can you give it? So he's giving mind, intelligence, and senses. That means he has mind, intelligence, and senses. The very word created means he has transcendental intelligence. For example, when the father begets a child, the child has senses because the father also has senses. The child is born with hands and legs because the father also has hands and legs. Sometimes it is said, therefore, that man is made after the image of God. Yeah, we see that in the Christian culture, the Judeo-Christian culture. Man is made in the image of God. The absolute truth is therefore the Supreme Personality with transcendental mind, senses, and intelligence. When one's mind, intelligence, and senses are purified of material contamination, one can understand the original feature of the absolute truth as a person. So, To be continued. Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Giridhar. Hare Krishna. All glories to all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna. Govinda.